games are capable of causing many different emotions. Sadness, fear, joy, and plain old fun, just to name a few. But every once in a while, something will happen that the player will feel ever so slightly guilty about. Like, oh, I don't know, forcing you into doing something that you know is morally wrong. When I was trying to come up with stuff to put in this countdown, I noticed something. Video games really like taking you out of your comfort zone. Okay, less taking and more get out there and do what I tell you. I noticed that these moments are actually really common when you stop and actively look for them. When I first had the idea for this countdown, I thought to myself, how am I supposed to rank something like this? Well, I thought I'd go with how much these specific events impacted me personally when playing the game. I decided to rank these based on how far out of my comfort zone these games were shoving me. And one more thing. There are spoilers everywhere. You have been warned. Now that that's out of the way, here are my top 10 I feel bad moments in video games. Pokemon. Such a cute series. Seriously, I struggle to play through an entire Pokemon game without going, "Aw, it's so adorable," at least a couple of times. I absolutely love these games, and I love all the little creatures I meet along the way. Which brings me to my next order of business. Get in the damn ball! No, I don't care if you're a literal whale. You are stuffing yourself into a tiny ball that I can fit in my pocket, and you are going to like it. Ha 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 ha! Now you are my slave, and you will do as I say! What was that you say? You don't want me riding on your back while you swim? Well, too bad! One way or another, I am getting to Moss Deep City. Wow, I'm a jerk. I admit it, I'm an animal lover. I'm not exactly PETA, but let's just say that seeing animal abuse legitimately bothers me. And when I play Pokemon, I can't help but feel that I'm the bad guy here. Maybe N was right. It's not a thought that comes into my head very often, but when I stop to actually think about what you do in Pokemon games, I can't help but feel ever so slightly guilty. Xenoblade Chronicles is an incredible game. Its gameplay has a lot of depth, the characters are interesting, and its story is one of the best in video game history. With a well-written story, you're bound to get quite a few emotional moments, and this game is absolutely no exception. At one of the huge turning points in the game, Shulk and the main villain, at the time at least, are about to make amends after one of the best boss battles in the game. However, Dixon, Shulk's adoptive father, isn't exactly fond of that. After literally shooting Shulk in the back, Dixon reveals that he's a disciple of the corrupt god Zanza. I won't explain too much about this because Xenoblade's plot is really freaking complicated, and let's be honest, we'd be here all day if that were the case. But the short version is that Dixon and your party eventually meet up at Prison Island. And you have to fight him. This is one of the more emotional fights in the game. You might think fighting Dixon would be satisfying after all he's done, and to an extent, you'd be right. He's a traitor, and he's been lying to you since the beginning of the game. But when you think about this from Shulk's perspective, this is actually quite tragic. Dixon is Shulk's only parental figure in his life. Well, other than Dunban, but he's more of an older brother-in-law, but that's besides the point. After the battle, as Shulk and his friends leave, Dixon remarks that he won't give them the satisfaction of seeing him die. And after lighting one last cigar, Dixon just kinda slumps over and dies. Despite how bad you feel for Shulk, this doesn't get any higher simply because at this point in the game, you probably hate Dixon with all your soul. And this ends up being a blend of both sad and satisfying. Personally, I'm just glad he's dead. Punch-Out is a fun game. It's stylish, fast-paced, and it's infinitely challenging. You might think that there isn't a sad moment to be found in a game like this, and for the most part, you'd be correct. But once you learn the ins and outs of the game, going back to fight some of the earlier boxers is incredibly easy, which does nothing but make you feel like a bully for refighting Glass Joe. Okay, this is more funny than sad, but still, don't you feel bad now? Joe couldn't defend himself if his life depended on it, yet all you do is beat the crap out of him. Joe, you might want to rethink your life choices. Boxing might not be for you. Whenever you put the words Zelda and emotional in the same sentence, most people, myself included admittedly, immediately think of Majora's Mask. There are a lot of emotional moments in this game, but can you really feel responsible for any of them? You'd have to say no, but that's only if you casually ignore the end of the world. Letting the moon crash into Termina is technically not a scripted event. It's entirely possible, and in fact quite easy, to beat the entire game without letting this happen at all. In my first playthrough of Majora's Mask, I did exactly that. I beat the entire game, side quests and all, without ever letting the moon hit the clock tower. So one day when I went back to it while showing my friend the Fierce Deities mask, he asked me what happens if the 3 days ran out. I told him I didn't actually know, because I had never seen it happen at this point. He said, well, let's find out, and we watched the clock hit 0. At that point, I watched in horror as the world I'd come to love so much over the course of the game was simply wiped off the face of the earth. I could do nothing but watch. The entire time, only one thing ran through my mind. Good thing I prevented this during my playthrough. If I'm being honest, No More Heroes is not the kind of game where you would take time to reflect on what you're doing. Yeah, I just sliced a mailman with a giant penis laser in half. What have you done today? But believe it or not, in the second game, Travis actually starts to do just that. Not the penis laser, the other thing. Oh, you know what I meant! He begins to realize the severity of death and that there are consequences for killing people. Of course, not legally, because even if there are cops in Santa Destroy, they clearly aren't doing their jobs. During the later parts of the game, Travis actually starts to respect the people he's fighting. Shocking, I know. One of these people is Captain Vladimir, who I immediately regretted putting to rest. Vladimir was a Soviet astronaut who essentially just went missing on a space mission one day. Throughout the fight with him, he shows signs that he thinks he's still in space and is trying to return to Earth. At this point, I just thought the guy had lost his mind. But upon actually beating Vladimir, he starts to regain his sanity. In his final moments, he remarks how beautiful the sunrise is and finally realizes he's been back home all along. Travis, finally understanding the concept of respect, decides to just let him be at this point. I felt bad during this scene because even though the poor guy probably wouldn't have become sane if Travis hadn't come along, I did just end his life, and just as he was back home in his mind. He was just a confused old man, and I just murdered him! I'll admit it, I'm usually not a big fan of shooters, but I felt almost obligated to make an exception for BioShock. It was, and still is, one of the most atmospheric games I've ever played. This game can be really creepy at times, and it loves to mess with your head. And one of the best examples— oh, screw this, I already mentioned BioShock, you know where I'm going with this. Yeah, to say that harvesting a little sister made me feel like a terrible person is a bit of an understatement. And you wanna know the worst part? I did this by accident! Yeah, I planned on only rescuing the little sisters, but I was in a bit of a rush one day, so I accidentally chose to harvest one. And if you've played BioShock, you'd probably know that they don't survive being harvested. Oops. Metal Gear Solid is filled with moments that can be considered emotional, and it wouldn't be a stretch to say that these games try to make you feel guilty for something at least once per game. I could have put any number of events from this series on this list, but the one I decided to go with just happens to be from my favorite game in the series, Metal Gear Solid 3: Snake Eater. There are several guilt-ridden moments from this game alone, but the worst offender by far is the end. Not the end of the game, there's a boss called the end— oh, you know what I mean! This is one of the most unique boss fights I've ever seen. It's literally a sniper duel. The End is an elderly, and by elderly I mean ancient, sniper who's considered one of the greatest veterans still alive, but not for much longer. There are actually two different ways to defeat the End, one of which you can't exactly call a victory. You can do what you're supposed to do and lower his health bar like any other boss fight, or you could take the easy way out and leave the game alone for a week of real time and the End will literally die of old age. This might seem like a funny little Easter egg at first, and to be fair, it kind of is. But the End knew he was gonna die soon. I mean, the dude's like 100 years old, so that kinda makes sense. But his last wish was to have an honorable duel with a worthy opponent. He didn't care if he won or lost a snake. All he wanted was one final match of equals before he bit the dust. But you didn't give that to him, now did you? This actually happened to me the first time I played MGS3. I was playing the 3DS version, and at the time, I abused the day changing on my 3DS to generate play coins. So what should have taken a week of real time to happen, happened to me in just a couple of hours. Just think about that for a moment.
Warning, the following segment contains graphic imagery, disturbing symbolism, intense violence, and massive spoilers for Silent Hill 2. Don't say I didn't warn you in advance.
Silent Hill is pretty infamous by now for being able to consistently screw with your brain. Silent Hill 2 in particular is famous for having one of the best plots ever put into a video game. It wouldn't be a stretch to call this the best game in the series, and as such, it's no stranger to messing with emotions every now and then. Yeah, every now and then. I might be understating that a little bit. Pretty early on in the game, the protagonist James meets Eddie Dombrowski, and he has just about as much dignity as you would expect from a fat guy vomiting in a toilet. They talk for a bit and then part ways, and you don't see Eddie again until much later in the game. But this is where everything goes horribly wrong. As if that hadn't already happened every damn minute in this game already. Eddie is found holding a gun in a room with a dead body. Upon noticing James, he immediately starts going on a rant, saying things like he had it coming and a corpse can't laugh at me. Eddie then becomes hostile and a boss battle starts. In a meat fridge. Because this is Silent Hill, you don't deserve reasons. You can probably figure out what comes next. You kill Eddie, yeah, big surprise, but this moment isn't on here for shock value. It's on here because of the aftermath. After the battle, James starts panicking because he begins to realize what actually just happened. It's only at the point of James's mental breakdown that the player starts to understand the severity of what they have just done. They killed another human being. Eddie wasn't just some monster, he was a person. A psychotic, mentally deranged person, but that's not the point. Eddie might not have been the most sane of people, but you still feel like a terrible person for ending another human life. Shadow of the Colossus. It's no secret that this game is a pretty big cult classic at this point, and if you were to actually play it, it's not too hard to see why. It's an incredibly simple concept. There's 16 titans wandering this land. Go kill them. But putting it that way is like handing somebody a Battletoads cartridge and telling them push buttons until you win. As you probably know by now, the challenge in Shadow of the Colossus doesn't come from the Colossi fighting back. In fact, most of them are relatively harmless. As a result, the game purposely tries to make you feel guilty for taking some of them down. As for what I chose to put on this list, it came down to which one I felt the worst about killing. At which point it's an obvious choice. Phalanx may be the biggest Colossus in the game and one of the most massive living creatures in any video game for that matter, but he's the most harmless of them by far. Most of the other Colossi that are docile at least try to defend themselves by shaking you off, but Phalanx doesn't do anything like this. He just flies around gracefully, not a care in the world. Taking down Phalanx may just be the only part of this game, other than the ending of course, that made me physically tear up. You just killed a harmless, beautiful creature. Good job, you sick, twisted person. Before I reveal my number one I feel bad moment in video games, let's recap. Number 10, catching a Pokemon. Number 9, Dixon's death. Number 8, I am such a bully. Number 7, it's the end of the world as we know it and I feel guilty. Number 6, in Soviet Russia, Vladimir kill you. Number 5, harvesting a little sister. Number 4, letting the end die. Number 3, killing Eddie, and number 2, killing Phalanx. All of these previous entries have had something in common. They're all events intentionally programmed into a game. In cases like the end dying or harvesting a little sister, they're avoidable, but they were still put into the game knowing that this is what's supposed to happen if the player triggers a specific event. Other entries like killing Phalanx, Dixon, or Eddie are scripted. The game forces you to do these things in order to progress, and it's impossible to carry on without doing what the game tells you to do. But number 1 is a bit different. It's not something that you can blame the programmers for. You can't blame the game, you can't blame a glitch. You can only blame yourself. I am talking, of course, about having a mass death in Pikmin. Pikmin games are mostly innocent fun. You run around with your little army of vegetables and command them to do your bidding. But believe me when I tell you that you have not known true guilt until you've had something go horribly wrong in a Pikmin game. No, I'm serious. Never before have I seen such a terrible act that I can't find any explanation for other than maybe I could have saved them if I was better at this game. Maybe if I had let them grow into flowers they could have outran the water wraith. Maybe if I'd whistled them sooner they wouldn't have been crushed by that Wollywog. Maybe if I didn't leave them alone unsupervised, they wouldn't have let themselves get eaten. It's like being a babysitter to a bunch of incompetent morons. You let them out of your sight for 5 minutes and they wander off and get themselves killed. And you don't get angry at the Pikmin's AI. No, you get angry at yourself for trusting them to be left alone to take care of themselves. And believe me, you'll end up doing that a lot in a game where this much multitasking is required for best results. This has been the Plant Commander, and remember that if something goes wrong in Pikmin, you have no one to blame but yourself.